How do you figure out chords and chord progressions? That's a question we received a lot, and people seem to be kind of overwhelmed mostly when they try to transcribe chords as opposed to melodies. So let me give you an actionable stepwise plan from beginner to advanced. While transcribing chords might seem hard in the beginning, all you really need to know is knowing your options and asking yourself the right questions in the right order. So if you stay to the end of the video, I promise you have many more actionable tools to figure out those chords that you want to figure out. Among the tools I will present to you is, for starters, a simple formula that you always can implement, advice in which order you want to zoom in on certain aspects of the harmony, and some practical tips what to do and certainly don't do. I've made plenty silly mistakes which I hope you won't have to replicate. So no excuses, everybody can learn this on his or her starting level. Okay, so let's start with the basic formula and allow me to explain right after. The fundamental formula you always want to start with in that order: bass note plus melody plus theoretical knowledge equals 70 to 80% of the information you need for the chord. Chances are big you can distinguish better single notes melodies as opposed to complete chords right away. Monophonic melodies contain way less information than the polyphonic ones, so always try to figure out the melody of the tune or the solo that you are transcribing, as that will provide much information about the quality of the chords. But the best info is always presented in the melody, as you can be sure it's relevant there. In case of a different chord section with no melody, you can try to find the top note of the voicing of that chord. The top notes usually will be the most clearest to you. Bass notes overall take a little bit more of effort to hear well, as low frequencies are less apparent. This will need a bit more time to filter out well, but you get better as you do it more. As a little side note, I know that bass players usually will play a little bit more than only the basic root of that chord, but in that case a bass player will usually play the root of that chord on the first beat of the bar, even when it's a walking bass or a funky groovy bass line. No need to try to guess the chords if you can already drive a high amount of info from just the melody and the bass. Remember, we are still singling out monophone factors, which most people can do here. To give you an example that the melody and the bass already provide such a high information on the harmony, I'll play you some parts of tunes with only the bass and only the melody with the lead sheet. Listen if you can hear the harmony well here. In this example, you can hear that mostly the melody is also the third of the chord, so it distinguishes it from minor to major. Here in the intro of the new Bond tune by Billie Eilish, you can see that all the notes already provide almost all the information needed for which chord it is. A little bit later in the pre-chorus we will also notice that the melody is frequently or a 7 or a third of the chord. And as the chords kind of repeat but the melody doesn't, we get different information every time a chord comes back. Also, with this last example, you can also see where the melody can help with figuring out if it has 7s or tensions, which is a more advanced chord use. The melody will always provide valuable info. To fill in the gaps, you can rely on a few certain factors. Most pop songs keep existing in a diatonic center, meaning all the chords happen within the key. The key can mostly be derived from looking at the melody. If it sounds outside the key, you mostly will know that there is happening something out of the ordinary, as most people tend to have a natural ability to hear diatonic.
And if we have B, A, G, F, what do we expect next?
Another option you always have, of course, is just look at the gaps and try those notes on the piano and listen if you can figure out the gaps. But there might be some differences among some tunes here. Some compositions are more clear in this than others. Johann Sebastian Bach, for example, was of course one of the biggest heroes, as with his two-part inventions he kept on modulating without the use of any chord, just the melodies on top of each other provided all the information you ever need to hear the harmony. So it requires a certain level of compositional skills. Although certainly some people might disagree with me, this is a factor you may take into account on which to base if a composition is good or bad. Baby, you light up my world like nobody else, the way that you... Another one is note theory and know your options. To write down a chord progression and to recognize chords, you have to know them in the first place, of course. I cannot recognize a person I never met or saw before. I would need to have a visual indication of this person and also be able to retrieve that info about this person. Same with audio. You'll first have to know your options before you can recognize it as such. It seems basic, which it is, but without, in the best case possible, you will be able to find the right notes, but just unable to write them down as an organized pattern. First, decide on the important notes. You have to know which are the most important notes to recognize a chord and in which order. We touched on this a bit before, of course, but I'll repeat it because it's so important. First, the bass note. Like with a building, you first need to lay out the foundation, which the bass is for harmony. Then the pillars that come next, and which really distinguish between a funeral or a wedding, is the third of the chord. So this is actually nice, so that means we can turn it in a multiple choice question. We also should add a little bit less common option of the sus4, which suspends this third, but assuming that it's mostly major or minor, you might want to try first if it's one of these two. Listen to the recording, hit the pause button, play the bass note on your piano and then try for the major or the minor third first. If neither feels correct, try for the sus4, which feels more open and a bit indecisive perhaps. In a few cases still, it can still feel you're not really there yet. Let me tell you a little anecdote which was really eye-opening for me on this part. When I was in the conservatory studying jazz, I wanted to make a lead sheet of a tune by Mike Stern and Richard Bona, One World. In the bridge section, I couldn't really find out the chords, although I actually used this step plan I just described to you. First, decide if it's major or minor, or otherwise sus4. No option worked and I was stuck, frankly. And a bit embarrassed, as I could hear it was really not a difficult jazz chord. But because I was stuck, I even tried all the difficult jazz options. It all didn't work. Now it seems pretty laughable and you maybe already heard it. It's just a power chord consisting of the root and the fifth and sometimes the octave back on top. So no thirds or even fourths involved at all. In my defense, this fifth interval, one of the most clear overtones, is a major third. And I tried for a major triad, but it somehow felt it was a bit right, but not completely. But this was a big lesson for me. I was looking way too far. So that's something you might include as well in the multiple choice question here. Power chords. If you're dealing with a bit more complex harmony, then besides this bass note and deciding upon the third, the next note to consider is the 7. If it's a major or a minor 7, or even in a very less likely case a 6. So given, let's say you determined that the bass note is an F, and then there is a major third on top of that with an A, then look out for the E or E flat and decide upon one of both. The major 7 would make it also a major 7th chord, but the minor 7 would make it a dominant 7th chord, which has really a different sound and a different function. If it's none of them, then you might try that 6, but even if that doesn't feel comfortable, it might be also just a try it, of course. You see, it's all about knowing your options and based on that, asking yourself the right questions in the right order. Some further quick tips and tricks here. It helps to know some chord instruments and voicings on those instruments. Learning some basic voicings on guitar or piano really will help you with some educated guesses, certainly when you found the bass and the top note of the chord. You will also get better in hearing chords as unified sounds, of course. I see many beginners putting on the song they want to transcribe and they start right away poking some notes on the piano to see if they just randomly guessed it right. Don't do that please, for multiple reasons. Best case, you hit a note on the piano and it felt good. Yay! Now you're still not sure if it's really a chord tone or just a note that sounded well diatonically within the scale. So even then, it doesn't really help you a lot. Secondly, and more importantly, you're covering the audio you're trying to listen to and you're covering it up with your own probably wrong notes. Just listen to the audio a few times on a loop so you really can ingrain that audio loop you want to go for. Then pause the music and only then try for some certain notes deliberately chosen like we just talked about before. First listen deliberately to the bass. If you have the bass, then you know which notes could be the third or the sus. Then try to decide upon one of these multiple choices. And then do the melody or the top note of your voicing. Now you have plenty of info already and you might just have to fill in some gaps, like the 5th or the 7th or even some tensions. Start transcribing a lot and don't give up. In the end, the only source of knowledge is experience. But at least I hope I saved you some time coming to certain realizations and with a proper workflow. This would have helped me a lot when I would start out, even from beginner. If all of this still didn't help, please leave me a comment in the section below. And if it did help, you might want to consider subscribing to this channel for all this kind of content and way more. Maybe also put on this notification bell, you know, that thingy that all YouTubers talk about, so you get a notification when we release a new video. So let me know what are your strategies for hearing chords. I would love to know more about the subject and also different approaches, of course. I'm Joran Reiners from Sharp 11 Music and I hope to see you next time.